Welcome back, my fellow Python programmers, to a brand new video, and in this one we're going to be creating a functions inventory system as a Python exercise, and we'll be covering the following topics. So if at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, please make sure to smash that like button because I need to beat the YouTube algorithm, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is going to be the inventory system program guide. Again, let me just tell you, if you're new to the channel, basically what I will do is I'm going to guide you through the process. You can go and do it on your own and then come back to my guide and watch how I did everything through the walkthrough. Or if you want, you can do every single point that you can, watch the video, then if you're stuck somewhere, go to where I am, etc, etc. Anyways, first thing is you'll need to create a dictionary in which the keys are item name, or the item name, and the values are a dictionary with the quantity and the minimum stock as a key. So basically, you are going to be creating a dictionary that contains a dictionary inside of it. And you'll have the keys as the item name, and then the values of these keys are going to be quantity and the minimum stock as the keys. So we're going to have one dictionary and then another dictionary inside. Next, you'll need to create an add item function that takes in three parameters: the name, quantity, and the minimum stock for an item. Then you'll check if the item is already in the inventory, then the quantity should be increased and the new minimum, and you'll need to set up a new minimum stock. Otherwise, the new item is added. So if the item is already in the inventory, you increase the quantity and you set a new minimum stock. Otherwise, a new item is simply added. Next, you'll need to create a search item function that finds a specific item sent to it, finds a specific items. This is a mistake. It finds a specific item sent to it as a string and returns its info, otherwise returns no found message. So search item takes in one parameter, which is the name of an item, and then based on that, you return the information, which is the quantity and the minimum stock. And finally, you'll need to create a list inventory function that prints out all the items with its details. Use the .items method to go through the dictionary, and this is true for any of these parts. So if you want to go and tackle this program on your own, pause the video right now and go ahead and try to do it. Okay, so as you can see in here, we create a dictionary variable called inventory. This dictionary has keys that are the names of our items, such as apple, bananas, and oranges, and each key is associated with another dictionary as its value. So as you can see, this is a second dictionary, and these inner dictionaries contain two keys: the quantity and the minimum stock. The quantity holds the number of items in a stock. So for example, inside of our inventory we have 50 apples, we have 20 oranges as the quantity, and the minimum stock indicates the minimum number of items that should be in stock or in our inventory. So for example, apples should have, or we should have at least 10 apples as our minimum stocks. So the inventory dictionary keeps track of how many of each item we have and what is the minimum acceptable stock level for each of those items. Okay, so first thing I did is I increased the font of my code so that you can clearly see it. Sorry if this one was not as clear. Next, what I did is I defined a function called add item. The function takes in three parameters: the name or the name of the item, the quantity or the quantity of the item to add, and the minimum stock, which is again the minimum stock for each of the items. We've already kind of explained these. Now inside the function, we first check if the item name already exists in the inventory, and we can do this using the in. If you're not sure how this works, I'm going to link the video where I explain dictionaries fully from A to Z, so you can go ahead and check that out. Now, if the name is in the inventory, which means the name would be, for example, apples. If apples is in the inventory, then what we do is we increment the quantity of that item name by the quantity that's provided to us. And the way that we're able to access the quantity of a specific name is using these two square brackets, one after the other. So first we access the actual item using its name inside of the inventory dictionary. Then we access the quantity of the dictionary that's inside of said item, and then we increment it. And we do the same for the minimum stock, and then we just have this simple printout just so we know that everything worked fine. Printing out the quantity, the name of the item, and finally how much total quantity there is. Now, if the name is not in the inventory, what we do is we are going to create a new inventory item. And the way we do this is by simply saying that this inventory, or inside of this inventory dictionary, we're going to create a new key with the name that is being sent to us, and that key will have a value that is the following dictionary that has quantity and the minimum stock. And again, we have this simple printout just to indicate that a new item was added, unlike what we had in here where the quantity was incremented. And again, if you're not familiar with how we operate on dictionaries, I highly recommend that you go watch the video. These are very simple stuff. When we say name in inventory, we're basically going through all the keys in an inventory and we're checking if name is in any of these. If you're familiar with how lists work and tuples, this is very similar. And again, we also have the following. This might be confusing for some of you because you've never worked with a dictionary that has a dictionary inside of it. So you might be familiar with this part, but you might be unfamiliar with this one. Just apply the same logic. We were able to access, for example, let's say in this example with the add item, where we had apples. First, let's right click and run. Also in here, I added the apples, added the cherries, and finally I printed out the inventory as well. So let's see, 20 apples added. So if you remember, we had 50 apples, now we have 70 apples. Cherries added to the inventory with a quantity of 40. So because we didn't have cherries previously in our inventory, which means that this condition was not true, which means that we went into the else statement, a new item inside of the inventory was added. And if I move this along in here, the big font doesn't help me. There we go, cherries with a quantity of 40 and a minimum stock of 60. So there we go, that is perfect. Now, even though, remember we said the minimum stock should be 60 and we have a quantity of 40, doesn't really make sense, but for now, we'll just think of it as an inconvenience, and later on we'll create functions that handle such problems. And by the way, the plus equal signs, I've already explained this many times. It means that we are incrementing, unlike what we're doing right here, where we are setting the minimum stock to the minimum stock that's been sent to us. So let's go ahead and continue on. One more thing in here, I realized that I'm adding apples and setting the minimum stock to 10, which was already 10. Let's try something else. Let's try just 7 and see how that works. So now apples, you can see that they have a minimum stock of 10. Okay, so in here we define the function search item. This function accepts one parameter, that is the name, which is a string, and we did this by adding a column, and then next to it we added str, which means string. This function also returns nothing, and we indicated that using the following syntax, where we have a dash and then a bigger sign, or whatever this one is called, I always forget. Basically, this arrow, you can draw it with the control and dot, depends on your keyboard, and then none, which means nothing. And inside the function, we added this following annotation. Now, why did we do this? So normally, if for example, you're using the print and I hover over the print, you can see that it fetches information, and you can see right here that we have values as objects, separators as strings, the and as a string. So all of these are indicators, and you'll see that the print also returns none. Now, in our add item, by the way, I commented out, if I hover over the add item, you can see that it doesn't really get us anything. It just says names, any, quantity, any, and it does return none, but this is because we already ran it and PyCharm understood that it returns nothing, or also because we don't have any return statement in here. But now look at the search. If I hover over the search, you can see that it actually provides me with documentation and the actual documentation that I wrote inside. So notice, search an item in the inventory, search an item in the inventory. The name is a string, none or nothing is returned, and I also have this params name. By the way, it was added automatically when I added these three double quotation marks, and I hit tab or enter, I believe, and the params and the name, the param name and the return were added automatically. So from here, let's continue. These annotations are very important because later on you'll have to do them in a challenge. So keep that in mind. I kind of gave away the challenge, but anyway, inside the function, we check if the item name already exists in the inventory, again, using the in, going through the keys, and if it does, we retrieve the item's detail from the inventory, which are stored in a dictionary with the keys, quantity, right here, and the minimum stock. So we then print these items out in a very nice looking, this item's information out in a very nice looking printout statement. So basically all that we do is we access the inventory through the name that was provided to us, if the name was in the inventory. If it's not, we simply say that the item is not found. And next what I did is I simply commented out these three lines where we add items to the inventory. This is just because I want to make sure that I focus on this. And two main things that I did not talk about when I created the add items, and I should highlight. First of all, if you use in here quantity with a uppercase Q, this is not gonna work. This is actually going to cause an error. Let me show you. If I uncomment this and I right click and I run, you can see that I get a key error quantity. Because we're working with strings, that means that uppercase letters make all the difference. So a uppercase Q is different than a lowercase q, or a quantity without an N is also not going to work. So make sure that you use the proper names. And I recommend that you actually copy them. Whenever you're working with string references, you have to actually copy them, or it's safer to just copy them. The same thing goes here. If I use orange with a capital O, even though we do have oranges in here, right click and run, you can see that oranges not found in the inventory. But if I do the following, right click and run, you can see that the items are oranges, quantity is 20, and the minimum stock for oranges should be 5. Okay, so as you can see in here, we again created defined a function that is called the list inventory that does not take any parameters this time. Inside the function, we use a for loop to go through each item in the inventory. So as you can see right here. But if you're not familiar with the .items, again, I recommend that you go and watch the video on dictionaries that I've linked somewhere around. It returns two things in here. So the inventory.items returns a list of key and value pairs. You can see the item in here is going to be the keys or the name of the inventory item, and the details are going to be the value, which in this case are the following dictionaries that contain the quantity and the minimum stock. So when we use the dot items, this might be a crazy phenomenon for you, but this is very normal. The items returns all the keys and value pairs, but because the details or the values of our dictionary are actually dictionaries themselves, that means that we have to apply these keys right here on them to access their information. So for each item we print out a formatted string that includes the name of the item right here. Yes, right here, the name of the item. Then we include the quantity and the minimum stock, which are inside of the details dictionary. And basically this function provides a simple way to view the entire inventory, showing each item's name and how many there is, or what's the quantity in the stock and what's the minimum stock as well. So when I right click and I run, you can see that right here I have the apples, bananas, oranges, and let's go ahead and uncomment the following. So now we should see that the quantity of apples is 70. You can see right here apples were added, cherries were added. So now when I look through the inventory, I can see that I have 70 with 7 as a minimum stock, and we have cherries at the end with a quantity of 40 and a minimum stock of 60, which is really, really cool. Okay, my fellow Python programmers, congratulations on going through the program walkthrough. It was kind of challenging, especially if you're unfamiliar with dictionaries or if you are a complete beginner. It's very natural to feel a little bit overwhelmed, especially when you have a dictionary inside of another dictionary. This is basically like Inception. You have a dream inside of a dream, so you have to kind of figure it out. I'm no Leonardo DiCaprio, but anyways, this is kind of getting bad. In any case, if you were able to do this entire program, congratulations. If you did not even try, now's your chance because it's time for a challenge. Let's go ahead and look at the challenge together. Okay, so it's time to remove and analyze your inventory. First of all, you need to create a remove item function that takes in two parameters, the name and the quantity, and deduce the item's quantity by the amount sent to it. First, you need to check if the quantity argument is not provided, then the default is going to be 1. So this is the use of default parameters. If someone doesn't provide how much quantity they want to remove, then only 1 should be removed. Next, the quantity should never go below 0, of course, because you can never have minus 10 apples. And finally, if the item's quantity gets less than the minimum, or in the minimum stock, a warning message should be printed out. Next, you'll need to annotate all the functions properly, just like I did with the search item function. Create a find most stocked item function that returns a tuple containing the name of the most stocked item and its quantity. And you also need to annotate this. So this is a very, very nice challenge where you have to think of, how do I annotate? How do I tell someone that this returns a tuple containing the name and the quantity? Very nice. Create a find the least stocked item function that returns a tuple containing the name of the least stocked item and its quantity. And finally, you'll need to create a calculate total inventory value function. As you can see, I'm very good at naming these functions, very short, very precise. A function that returns the total values of an inventory, assuming each item has the same value. So this function should basically take in the price of an item, and then you get the total amount of everything and multiply it by that value, and you get, well, the total value of everything in your inventory. So pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so as you can see, first of all, I minimized the inventory and the previous functions that we've created so that we have more space to create new functions. So first of all, in here, as always, we've defined a new function called the remove item that takes in two parameters, the name and the quantity. Now the name, of course, it's going to be the name of the item that we want to remove, and the quantity is the amount of units or number of items that we want removed. Now, as I told you, if no quantity is provided, like right here on the apples, then the default value should be 1. And the way that we do this is we say that it's quantity equal to 1. So inside of the function, what we do is, first of all, we check if the name is already in the inventory, meaning that we check if the item exists in our inventory, but we also check if we actually have enough quantity to remove, because remember, I told you quantity can never go below 0. So we need to check in here if the quantity is greater than, or using the name, after we've checked that the name is actually in the inventory, we check if the inventory at that name or at that item at the quantity that it has. So again, in here we're accessing the quantity inside. Let me open up the inventory again. So again, we access the quantity of a certain item and we check if it's greater than the quantity that's being sent to us. And if it is, if both of these conditions are true, because when we're working with an AND, we need both sides to be true, otherwise it will not work. If this one is false, but this one is true, it will not work. But if this one is true and this one is false, it also will not work. If both of them are true, that means that we have the item in our inventory and the quantity is enough. Then we're going to go inside of the if statement where we reduce the quantity of said item by the quantity sent to us using the minus equals. Just like we've used the plus equals, we can use the minus equals to decrement. And then we print out that this item was removed and the remaining quantity that we have. But we also check if this removal brings the item stock below its minimum required level, that is the minimum stock, and then we print out a warning sign right here. So the way we do this is we access the quantity of that item and then we access the minimum stock of that item, and if the minimum stock is greater than the quantity, then we print out a warning message. And finally, if the name is not in the inventory or the quantity is not enough, we have the else statement right here that prints out error, insufficient, etc., or the item is not found. So in here, after I've added some of my items, I'm going to remove 5 bananas. As you can see right here, I have 30, so this should be good. Then I remove apple, but notice I did not specify how much I want removed. So this should be, this will be a great way to test out if our default value or default parameter works. And finally, I try to remove pineapples that do not exist. And one more thing I want to do is I want to remove 500 apples just to see if our little if statement right here works. So right click and run, and as you can see 20 apples were added, cherries are added, 5 bananas were removed, and you can see that we have insufficient apples, or insufficient pineapples, or the inventory, or they do not exist. So okay, I just noticed something and I was thinking, why do I have an error or an insufficient amount of apples? That's because it's not apples, or I mean, it's not apple, it's apples. So there we go. As you can see, this can be a huge problem. Now when I right click and I run, you can see that 1 apple was removed and 5 bananas were removed. And we can see that bananas were 30. And when we print out the list right here with the list inventory, you can see that now bananas are 25 and apples are 69, funnily enough. One more thing, when I tried to remove 500 apples, we got an error. When I tried to remove pineapples, we also got an error. So everything seems to be working fine. Okay, so now I am annotating my functions. As you can see right here, the name is a string, the quantity is an integer, and the minimum stock is an integer. They cannot be floats. Of course, you cannot have 2.5. I mean, you can have 2.5 apples, but does that even make sense? And of course, it's a none. As you can see in here, I added these three double quotation marks, add or update the item. Once I hit enter, or I wrote the three double quotation marks and hit enter, you can see that it added the params right here and the return, which is nothing. I'm going to do the same for the list inventory. As you can see, the search item is already annotated, so you can take remarks from that. Okay, so I wanted to stop here just to tell you about how this one works, which might have been confusing. So the name is a string, very easy. It returns none, very easy. The only issue was that right here, how do we say that the quantity is an integer and it has a default value? Some people try to do it like this. So add the two dots and integer afterwards, but no, it's not how it works. You first have to indicate that the quantity is an integer and then say that its default value is 1 if nothing is provided. Okay, so this is the new function that is the find the most stocked item. As you can see, I'm brilliant at naming my functions. In here, I told that I no longer return none, just like we had with all of our previous functions that we've created. This time we return a tuple, and inside of the tuple we have a string and an integer. In here, as you can see, I said that we find and return the item with the highest quantity, and the return is just in here, nothing. I mean, this was the default that was given to me. Anyway, in here, what we do is kind of maybe spooky to some of you, but this should be pretty familiar. Again, I haven't created a full-length video about list comprehensions, but I did create a short video, and I'm going to link it somewhere at the top. So the function, again, returns a tuple that contains a string and an integer, where the string is the name of the item and the integer is the highest stock. Now inside, what we do is we create this quantities item, which is a list. And how did I know it's a list? Well, because we're using list comprehension. We have these two square brackets on either side. Now let me break this code down. So first of all, in here, this is a tuple. The reason why I knew it's a tuple, because it has these non-square brackets. I don't know what they're called. That's just normal brackets, round brackets around, and we have two items, the details with quantity inside and the item next to it. And right here I have four items, details in inventory items. So this is very similar to what we did right here in the search. No, not in the search. Exactly what we did in the list. In the list, where we have, this is the same format right here. So if you can understand this, it's exactly the same as this one, but now we have it on a single line. So we say that we want to create a tuple that has the quantity inside of the details dictionary. The second item of the tuple is going to be the item, and then this is, or we create this list of tuples for item, details in the inventory dot items. Again, I will link it somewhere. If this is the first time that you see list comprehension, you might be shocked. You might be like, oh my god, why am I learning such advanced and futuristic methods? It's very, very simple. The reason why I wanted to make it into a list is because I wanted to find the max quantity. So after creating a list of tuples that has the quantities and the names of the items, I then find the highest quantity with the most stacked items, and I return this tuple right here. So let's go ahead and call this function. So right here, after the list inventory, I'm going to print out just a couple of, or you know what? Let's make the find least stocked item, and then we will call both functions. Okay, so as you can see, I simply copied the find most stocked items and made some modifications. First of all, I called it the find least stocked item. In here, in the description of the function, I said that the least quantity, and then I called this one, instead of the highest, the least, or maybe it should have been the lowest. So the lowest quantity boom, boom, lowest, and then the least instead of the most stocked item. This is just simple variable name changes, so they don't really affect anything. But what does affect things is instead of the max, I used the min. So right here, I'm going to print out about 50 dashes. So multiplied by 50, this creates 50 dashes, and then I'm going to print out the find least stocked or find the most stocked, duplicate this line using Ctrl D, and find the most, find the least stocked. So I use this print to separate things, and then I print out the find most and find least. Right click and run, and as you can see, apples is the most stocked and oranges is the least stocked. And if we go back to the inventory, you can see that 50, 30, and 20, and even when we add cherries, you can see right here that 40 is still higher than what we have with oranges, which is 20, so everything works. Now you might be thinking, why did we use a print in here? Well, because these two functions don't print anything themselves. They simply return the least stocked or most stocked and highest quantity. So we have to actually print them out, because if we don't, I'm going to show you, for example, right here, if I simply call it, I don't get anything. Nothing is printed out. So we actually have to print out the values that are being returned to us. So I hope that is clear. Okay, so let's go back right here. First of all, we created or defined the calculate total inventory value that takes in the item value as a float. This time, yes, it is a float, not an integer. Why? Because the price of something can indeed be 5.2, 7.3, etc, etc. So it's appropriate to use a float in here. Next, we said that this also returns a float. So this is the first time that you see that we, instead of returning like a tuple, which is kind of complicated, I know, but in here we simply return a float. We have the description of the function, and in here we sum up all the quantities of the items in the inventory. Now again, in here we're using a spooky new method that is the dot values. And by the way, what's the difference between a function and a method? Well, a function is what we created right here, where we can simply call it out of nowhere without anything, but a method is when we actually apply it to an object. So for example, inventory dot values, whoops. And by the way, if you don't know what objects are, I'm going to again link the object-oriented programming guide or video somewhere around here. So the inventory.values, the .values function returns all the values. So you can also have the .keys, which returns all the keys. The .values returns all the values, and the .items returns the keys and the values at the same time. So right here, the values are returned. What does that mean? That means that we get these values for each key, and we set them in the variable item, and then we can access the quantity on that item. And once we've accessed all of them, they are all set in a list, and we sum all of them up and we have the total quantity. And then finally, we actually call this function right here, and we give all the items a value of 5.2. Maybe that's a bit of expensive. You can choose whatever you want. This function doesn't even make any sense. Typically what we would have is we would have the price right here. We would add an extra thing, but I am going to cut this video into two parts. This is a very, very big project. Well, we're already, like in my recording, I'm at the 55.44, 45, 46 second mark. And I decided, like, I was building this and it got way too big. So we're going to continue later on. Yeah, I should have kept that until the end. But anyways, right now when I right click and I run, boom, as you can see, I get nothing. Why? This is very important. This is a very nice question. Why didn't I get anything? Well, of course, because I returned the total quantity. So I actually need to print this out. So now I should get 154, and of course, wow, that's very nice. It actually, there was no floating point. So again, I hope you enjoyed. This is kind of advanced, especially if you don't know list comprehension, but again, I've linked the videos. You should watch them, you should understand them, and there we go. Whoa, oh my god, that was a long video. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. If you have any questions, you can always leave them in the comments. Subscribe, all of that good stuff. Again, as I was rumbling around and mumbling inside of the video, I was creating this project and it started to balloon and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I decided to cut it in the middle and then continue on a second part, which is going to be right here, where we are going to be exploring more dictionaries. We're going to be exploring more in functions, but most importantly, we're also going to be exploring file handling. So we're going to have massive amounts of information that we can't simply store on dictionaries right here in our IDE. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to store them in a text or .csv file, and we'll see how we can import that information, update it using code, and then give that information back to the files. And I'm looking at myself in the camera just to see if there is enough room to mention the video that you should watch next and continue your Python programming and learning journey. Let's go.